Okay. International financial institutions. The Biden-Harris administration stepped up support for developing countries, particularly by strengthening international financial institutions. The administration led reforms to the multilateral development banks across their missions, incentive structures, operational approaches, and financial capacity to equip these institutions to be able to respond to the global challenges of today with sufficient speed and scale. The administration helped drive an agreement on a new International Monetary Fund quota increase to strengthen the institution and made significant new resources available to low-income countries through the IMF. And the administration also put forward a call to the international community to help developing countries with mounting debt burdens to be able to invest in their own futures. Protected the American people from terrorism and wrongful detention. President Biden worked to keep Americans safe and secure, maintaining an unwavering focus on terrorism and working both unilaterally and with partners to disrupt threats around the globe and degrade ISIS and Al-Qaeda. To counter foreign terrorist organizations, President Biden signed the National Security Memorandum to counter international terrorism threats, directing a focus on the most acute threats to the U.S., investment in partnerships, the promotion of civilian-led non-lethal approaches wherever possible, and the execution of the counterterrorism mission in a manner consistent with U.S. values. At President Biden's direction, the United States took key leaders of ISIS and Al-Qaeda off the battlefield, including Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, who helped direct the 9/11 attacks, and ISIS leader Haja Abdullah. In January 2023, President Biden authorized an operation in northern Somalia that resulted in the death of Bilal al-Sudani, a key operative and facilitator for ISIS's global network, as well as a number of other ISIS operatives. These successful missions sent a powerful message to all terrorists who threaten America that we are committed to finding and eliminating terrorist threats to the U.S. and to the American people wherever they are hiding, no matter how remote. The Biden-Harris administration worked closely with Five Eyes and European partners to prevent and disrupt threats in the West, and cooperated with France and other partners to enable safe Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris for athletes and spectators from around the world. To ensure the U.S. government had the tools it needed to counter terrorist threats, President Biden directed his team to work with Congress to renew and reform Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, one of the United States' most vital intelligence collection tools. This tool provides essential authority to understand and prevent a wide range of dangerous threats to Americans while protecting privacy and civil liberties. The Biden-Harris administration implemented the first ever national strategy for countering domestic terrorism to prevent and disrupt this urgent threat to America's national security. As a result of this work, the administration sharpened its understanding of the domestic terrorism threat, increased information sharing with state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement and foreign partners. It doubled its investigations into domestic extremism and terrorism, and expanded its capabilities to disrupt and prosecute such acts, all while safeguarding privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. President Biden and his team worked around the clock using intense diplomacy to negotiate for the release of Americans held hostage or unjustly detained abroad so that they could be reunited with their families. Biden brought home over 75 Americans held hostage. Once again, Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan, Evan Gershkovich, and David Lynn from places around the world such as Afghanistan, Burma, Gaza, Haiti, Iran, Russia, Rwanda, and Venezuela. Stood with Ukraine in defense of freedom and democracy. President Biden rallied the world to defend Ukraine after the Kremlin's all-out invasion in February 2022, pulling together the most far-reaching global coalition assembled in decades. As a result, Kyiv is still free today, fighting for its freedom, democracy, and sovereignty. President Biden worked around the clock to build a coalition of more than 50 countries to support the people of Ukraine by providing funding that was critical to helping them defend their freedom and independence and protect themselves from Russia's brutal attacks. President Biden led the way in the groundbreaking G7 announcement to make available $50 billion to Ukraine without burdening taxpayers by leveraging the extraordinary revenues of immobilized Russian sovereign assets. President Biden worked with allies and partners to impose unprecedented costs against Russia to cut off funding for their war and hold them accountable for their aggression against Ukraine, as well as economic and humanitarian assistance. Years into what Moscow expected to be a short war, Russia remains unable to advance on the battlefield without high costs. President Biden made clear that the United States will stand with Ukraine until it prevails. Okay, there's so much here. I'm going to skip over part of this. Well, actually, no, I'm not. I've decided not to. Work to build lasting peace in the Middle East. This is such a constantly changing situation, that's why I hesitated. But I'll read it. President Biden and his administration worked steadfastly to bring peace and stability to the Middle East. Biden consistently demonstrated that his support for the security of Israel was ironclad. Immediately after Hamas launched its heinous attack on October 7th, President Biden stood strong with Israel and became the first sitting U.S. president to visit Israel in wartime. Biden built a regional coalition to counter Iran's attack on Israel. Today, thanks to his support for Israel, Iran is weaker and more exposed than when the Biden-Harris administration took office 4 years ago. Its proxies, including the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas, are weakened, and its longtime ally Bashar al-Assad has fallen. President Biden was clear that far too many Palestinian civilians had been killed or wounded in this conflict, and from the beginning of the conflict in Gaza, he led international efforts to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. President Biden worked day and night to secure a deal that would free the hostages being held by Hamas terrorists, including Americans, result in an immediate ceasefire, create the conditions for an increased amount of humanitarian aid to get into Gaza and end the current conflict. At President Biden's direction, the U.S. continued to work to build the conditions for a lasting peace in the region, including through support for a two-state solution, so that after this conflict is over, Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in lasting peace. Responsibly managed competition with the People's Republic of China. The Biden-Harris administration strengthened the United States' competitive position vis-a-vis the PRC and took historic steps to deliver on the U.S. strategy to invest, align, and compete. The Biden-Harris administration made far-reaching investments in the foundation of American strength at home and deepened its ties with Indo-Pacific and European allies and partners to shape the rules of the road and address challenges to shared security, prosperity, and values. President Biden took necessary action to prevent advanced U.S. technologies from being used to undermine its national security and to address China's unfair trade policies and non-market practices. As he took these steps, the administration conducted effective diplomacy with the PRC in a way that built stability into one of the world's most consequential relationships, including concrete progress to stem the flow of fentanyl precursors and the renewal of some military-to-military communication. Through this diplomacy, the Biden-Harris administration responsibly managed competition to ensure that it does not veer into conflict. Reform the U.S. approach to technology and national security. As the United States made historic investments to ensure that the technology of the future is made in America, President Biden took bold steps to ensure that sensitive technologies do not end up in the hands of those who would use them against us. The Biden-Harris administration developed strategic and tailored restrictions to ensure that the most advanced U.S. semiconductor technologies cannot be exported to China or other competitors, given the implications for military or intelligence advantage. The Biden-Harris administration restricted American outbound investment into the most critical technologies, including semiconductors, AI, and quantum systems. President Biden's executive order on preventing access to America's bulk sensitive personal data and the administration's rule protecting Americans from connected vehicles from countries of concern are among the actions taken to prevent Americans' data, technology, and intellectual property from being weaponized or exploited by adversaries. Additionally, the Biden-Harris administration led a global effort to counter the misuse of commercial spyware. The U.S. led by example through President Biden's executive order that prohibits the use of commercial spyware that poses national security risks and holds those who enable misuse accountable through financial sanctions. Climate and environment. When President Biden took office, he pledged to restore America's climate leadership at home and abroad. On day one, the president signed the United States back into the Paris Climate Agreement. The Biden-Harris administration delivered on the most ambitious climate, conservation, and environmental justice agenda in history, setting into motion an economic transformation that created hundreds of thousands of good, clean energy jobs, revitalizing American manufacturing, cutting household energy costs, and making progress toward Biden's goal of reducing U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by 50% to 52% below 2005 levels in 2030, by more than 60% in 2035, and achieving a net zero economy by 2050. By passing legislation to deliver the largest climate and clean energy investments ever and taking hundreds of executive actions across every sector of the economy, the Biden-Harris administration tackled the climate crisis with urgency, had grown a clean energy economy that benefits all Americans, and protected clean air, clean water, and our public lands for future generations. Deploying clean, affordable electricity and strengthening America's power grid. President Biden secured historic investments in a clean power sector, unleashing a boom in American solar, wind, battery storage, nuclear, geothermal, and other clean energy technologies that are creating good-paying jobs and saving families money on utility bills. Through the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, U.S. solar generation is projected to increase, or was projected to increase, up to eightfold, and wind generation is projected to triple by 2030, while electricity costs would fall by as much as 9%. The president's Investing in America agenda supported transmission build-out and other power grid upgrades, investments in clean energy across rural America, the demonstration and deployment of new nuclear reactors, and American manufacturing of clean energy technologies. Over the past 4 years, more than 440 new or expanded battery and solar manufacturing facilities have been announced in the United States, and half of all solar in the United States was installed during the Biden-Harris administration. President Biden jump-started the U.S. offshore wind industry with the first large-scale projects under construction and accelerated deployment of clean energy on public lands, including permitting approvals for over 40 projects since January 2021, enough to power about 3.5 million homes. President Biden led a dramatic recovery of the U.S. nuclear energy industry. His administration brought the first new plant online in decades, and the United States pledged to support tripling nuclear at home and abroad, with pathways to safely and responsibly deploy 200 gigawatts of net new capacity by 2050. Just a side note, I don't support nuclear energy. But anyway, we'll keep going. To deploy these investments, the Biden-Harris administration took action to accelerate efficient and effective project permitting and environmental reviews. This includes passing the first legislative reforms to modernize the National Environmental Policy Act in 50 years, finalizing the bipartisan permitting reform implementation rule to accelerate the federal environmental review process, and investing more than $1 billion from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act to expedite federal agency permitting. With the help of these investments and reforms, the Biden-Harris administration reduced the median time to complete the most complex form of environmental review by 8 months, or 23% faster than during the previous administration. To be continued.